And when the bass really kicks in, it'll probably overpower the microphone and cut out a little bit, but at a minimum, we got to turn it up and at least see what it'll do. So let's go. Hey, Jeff at Sweet Sounds here, back again with another super fun project we just finished up. This is a brand new Heyday ski, wakeboard, and surf boat that came in for a whole lot of upgrades. Let's go ahead and swing around, take a quick look at this boat. So these Heyday boats are built by Brunswick, and Brunswick makes a few other brands you are probably familiar with. They make Sea Ray, and I believe they make Lund fiberglass boats, and then a few other lines also. So pretty cool boat. Got some cool graphics on it already. It came in without any, well, just some minor accessories added onto it, and then just the standard stock audio system in here. And the standard stock audio system is a couple of Rockford Fosgate pairs of speakers, their lower end speakers, and then a Rockford PMX2 head unit, which is a good head unit, but not really capable of doing everything we need it to do. So we've changed out a few of those to go to some higher end radios. So in addition to a lot of audio accessories, audio equipment that we put in here, we did a number of accessories also in this thing. So one of the things that we're super well known for here is taking the time to go through a very thorough consultation with our clients to make sure that what we're supplying them both fits their needs now and in the future, and allows an easy upgrade path should they choose to do some more upgrades in the future. So this client stopped by with his boat. He's actually from kind of southwest Minnesota. I don't know, hour and a half away from us, whatever it might be. And he had found us online, I believe. Saw a bunch of our reviews and kind of saw how we did some of our work, stopped by, and we started talking, and actually ended up leaving the boat with us that day. I spent some time going through it. This was actually my first time working on a Heyday boat, but as I mentioned, we've worked on, I don't know, hundreds of different kinds of boats and different models of boats, and are very, very comfortable with them. And no problem work on this boat by any means either, but we went through it. We put together a couple different options for the customer, and we really talked to him about what his plans were for this boat, how he uses it, how his family uses it, who goes with him, are there grandparents in the boats, kids in the boats, other adults in the boat, are they surfing with it most of the time, are they out there pulling a lily pad and doing just lounging around, are they pulling up to sandbars and hammering away on the stereo? Did they spend 4 or 5 hours on the lake, or they want to spend 4 or 5 hours on the lake and not have to worry about a dead battery? All those different things we discussed. So we actually presented a couple different options for this customer, and we must have emailed back and forth about 10 or 15 different times, and then we had about 5 or 6 different phone conversations to really dial in exactly what we wanted to do in this thing. And that's a super important aspect, to really make sure that we get what the customer wants. It's not really about what we want to do in these things, it's what the customer wants, what they need to be able to fulfill what they're trying to do. So after quite a bit of discussion with the client, we determined a new radio, some tower speakers, upgraded speakers, amplification, and then a whole bunch of other accessories in this thing to allow the customer, the client, to be able to use the boat the way they want to use it. So for example, some extra volume controls that can be controlled from the swim deck, another volume control, so whoever's sitting in the passenger seat can control them all. So that's where his wife usually sits, he tells me. So he wanted her to be able to control the radio so he doesn't have to drive and take care of the volume and radio and everything else everybody wants changed all the time. He wanted to be able to do some different charging. He wanted to be able to sit around and not have to worry about a dead battery. So we talked about charging systems being installed in here, extra batteries, different battery switches, isolation systems, and a whole number of different things. And honestly, this is one of my favorite parts of the job. I love working on boats. I love designing different systems for these things. So after quite a while, we really narrowed down exactly what he wanted, and I think he's going to absolutely love this thing. He hasn't had a chance to see it yet, but when he does, we know he's going to absolutely love it. So let's go ahead and start off with some of the audio equipment. So we pulled out the Rockford PMX2 head unit, which again, it's a good head unit. It just isn't capable of what we need it to be capable of. So we need 3 sets of RCA outputs to be able to control separate zones on this thing. So for example, we have interior speakers, meaning the speakers in the factory locations, the 4 speakers there. We added tower speakers to that, and we added subwoofers to this thing also. And we want independent control over each one of those zones. So for example, if you're surfing, you might want to send 100% of energy to the towers, but only 30% of the energy to the lower speakers. Or let's say you're out lounging around on the lily pad and the grandparents are in the boat. They want to sit in the front, not have to be blasted with the music. So you can put 10% of power to the interior speakers and 100% to the tower speakers. Or likewise, let's say you're doing a little evening cruise around the lake. You might not want to have any output coming from the tower speakers. You might want everything going to the interior speakers. And of course, have an independent subwoofer control. So whether you're listening to current top 40 hip hop, bass music, or you're throwing on some classic rock, you have the ability to adjust that, to dial it in to sound exactly the way you want it to do. So we will go ahead and look at some of the equipment here. And like I mentioned, we started off with the Kenwood KMR XM500. It's a pretty new radio. It is a gauge style radio, so it dropped right into the location on that one. We did end up doing quite a bit of rewiring on the radio. Not only how it gets turned on, but how it's powered off a new battery source and a bunch of other things. We'll get into that. So, new Kenwood radio. That is also tied in with 2 new Kenwood remote control units. One of those is back at the swim deck location, and the second one is in the what I would call the passenger front seat. It's where his wife sits all the time so that she can have control of the radio and he doesn't have to deal with that while he's driving. From there, we chose to go with 2 amplifiers in this boat, and the first one is the JBL Club A1000. Most people don't realize, but that is a true fully marine grade amplifier. If you look at their white series of JBLs or Infinity amplifiers, you will find that they are identical amplifiers. These are sealed on the inside. They just don't sell them as a marine amplifier, but it's 100% the same as other marine grades, just look a little bit different. That powers the 2 subwoofers with 1,000 watts RMS. It's a great choice. And then the DD amplifier, this is a really specific, unique amplifier. This is the D4.200 amplifier, and this is a monster 4-channel amplifier. This thing will legitimately do like 4 by 550 watts if you're running all the way down to 1 ohm. And the reason we wanted to go with this amplifier was it gives them total flexibility now and in the future. So it's plenty of power no matter how many speakers you put into this thing. So right now, half of that amplifier is running the 4 lower speakers and half of it is running the 2 tower speakers, and it's plenty of power for both of those. If he wants to add a second set of towers, we already pre-wired it for that. So we ran 4 14-gauge wires up to those tower speakers, and then we hid them up there, and we ran them down to the amplifier. So if he wants to add a second set of towers later on, he can do that. We've done as much pre-work for that as possible. And likewise, if he decides he wants to add another set of interior speakers, or maybe if you wanted to look at doing a set of speakers out the back of the boat or any number of things like that, this amplifier is capable of running several more sets of speakers, and it basically just keeps doubling its power every time you have the impedance load on there. So super strong, powerful amplifier. I actually use that same amplifier in my own boat, and it is a monster. Super, super powerful. That amplifier is actually capable of about twice as much power as the subwoofer amplifier is. So super, super strong amplifier. From there, we upgraded the speakers, and we chose to go with the Infinity Kappa Marine speakers. Those are called 6.5-inch speakers. They're actually probably closer to 7 3/4. They are huge 6.5-inch speakers. Anytime we put these into a boat, we always have to enlarge the hole size. These are going to be the same as the JBL Stadium Marine speakers. Not everybody knows, but JBL and Infinity, along with a whole bunch of other different companies, are all Harman audio-based companies, and they make both of those lines. So you'll see a lot of times we'll use JBL and Infinity, basically just depending upon what happens to be the better color for what we're doing in it. And in this one, we liked the Infinity speakers in there. Subwoofers, match those up with a Infinity Kappa Marine 10-inch woofers. 210s is as much bass as we could fit into the specific location where these subwoofers went. Originally, we had looked at doing just one subwoofer. Customer wanted to talk about 2 subwoofers. About halfway through the install, we ended up actually giving the customer a call and recommended just go ahead and get that second one done right away. We had all the amplification for it. We had all the wires in for it. And by the time we were in there making all the mess and cutting all the fiberglass out, whatnot, and laying everything out, because we were very specific about making sure all of our woofer holes line up really, really exactly. It just made sense to go ahead and get that second subwoofer in there right now. Customer's super easy going. He agreed. We went ahead and got that done. And then for the tower speakers, those are the JBL Marine. They call those the Tower X, and those are an 8-inch speaker. Once again, ran off of half of that DD4 channel amplifier, and those things sound awesome. And if the customer wanted to add a second set of those, like I mentioned, it's already all pre-wired for that. We never want to go back and route wires through towers a second time. You want to try to pull those all in one shot, and we used the factory existing locations to pull those through. Went up one pipe, you cross over the center beam up top, and then back the second pipe to where the speakers are mounted, and it worked out absolutely great. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll climb into the boat here. I'm going to move a couple of these boxes real fast just so that I don't have to deal with them falling off while we're playing this audio system, and so that we can look at some of this other stuff in here. And then we will take a listen to it. And at the very end of the video, I'm going to go ahead and put a few pictures up also of the work that was done in here, just because some of this is going to be really hard to get on video. There's so many panels and whatnot in this boat, but I like to kind of show the boats when they're assembled rather than when they're all taken apart, so you get a much better idea of what the finished product is going to look like. And one thing I always mention in pretty much all of my videos is we don't climb into people's boats with our big boots on and things like that. We like to treat boats the same way we want our boats treated, so we always wear socks or very soft sandals if it comes down to it anytime we're working on these projects. So let's go ahead and start in the back here. So as I mentioned, this boat received 2 of the Kenwood wired remotes, and one of those went back here on the swim deck. Easy to use, it's out of the way. That's actually the same place the factory puts their upgraded stereo secondary controller. Works out well, easy to use, easy to access. You can stand up here and get to it. You can sit down when you're strapping in, no problem at all. From there, let's go ahead and climb on in here and take a look at the rest of it. One thing I want to point out right off the bat is that these JBL tower speakers do include the really nice neoprene sleeves for them, so that they stay in good shape. Keeps the bugs and crap off of them too, especially when you're towing them or not using them. So that's another nice thing. Let's go ahead and climb in here. We might as well just go ahead and talk about the other steering remote right off the bat. And that went into this location here. And this was one we went back and forth with the customer. We had actually talked about mounting it on this wall. We had talked about mounting it down there. I talked about mounting it down there, but ends up being when you're sitting in this seat most of the time, especially if you're watching people surfing behind you, you're kind of sitting in here kitty corner, and when you're sitting here kitty corner, just barely reaching your left arm out, your hand really ends up landing right on that steering wheel control. So it ended up being an excellent spot for that. Very easy to use, very easy to control. Let's go ahead and flip up the glove box. Like we do in many boats, this one also received one of our dual USB quick charge ports along with the voltmeter on there, so you can kind of see that. I'm going to go ahead and flip this open while we got that open. You can see that there are two USB 3.0 quick charge ports on that, so you can plug in your tablets, your phones, whatever devices you need to charge up. And then it also has a voltmeter on there, and there's actually a little switch on this thing too. You can turn that voltmeter off if you want to, though most people just have a tendency to leave them on. And then it has a water resistant cover on there also. One other thing we like to add anytime, especially on boats that have this much stuff into them, we oftentimes add a little spare parts kit. So for example, we did a battery in this thing, and this battery has a little bit different terminals than his other battery has on it. So we went ahead and included like the wrench for that. We went ahead and included a spare fuse. There's a couple different fuse blocks in here, so we included some other parts for that too. So we always like to make sure people are taken care of, just in case they happen, something goes wrong out in the water. They have the ability to take care of everything they need right there with them. That's always important. So that worked out fantastic. Of course, let's go over here and slide and talk about the head unit. So as I mentioned, when the client is driving this boat, with the radio over here on the right hand side, it's pretty difficult for anybody else in the boat to access that. So we wanted to have that secondary and third wired controller so his wife can access it from over there. That worked out really well. This actually fit fine into the existing factory control in there. We did not use any of the original wiring on this thing though, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the power system in this thing before we get too much further into the audio system. So the audio system is turned on and off with this one accessory switch right here. Now what we did was we rewired that accessory switch to a new battery in here also. So the audio system in here is 100% isolated from the starting battery if they wanted to be. They can join them together, but they can also run them completely independently. And then there's also another actual cutoff switch for that battery also. And we'll get to the back and talk about that. But really simple, you don't even have to have the key on in here. We just simply rewired the wires going into that switch so that when we have our secondary battery turned on, you can flip that switch up and the audio system will come on, and you can leave the starting battery 100% disconnected from both the motor if you want to and the stereo. And this boat had a USB port down here also. We were able to retain that. You can actually see a thumb drive plugged into that right now. And you can of course see one of the speakers that went into here. It's the Infinity speaker. Went into the existing location. Didn't need to be enlarged to make that fit. Of course, everything we do is stainless steel fasteners throughout, and then we use plastics, composites, fiberglass, vinyl, and things like that. We don't use any wood. We don't use any steel when it comes to these kind of projects. So, second speaker location, once again where the factory one went. The other two speakers in the front, those also went to the factory locations. And then the subwoofers. And as I mentioned, I'm very, very specific about how these things line up. And you can actually take a square, an angle, and put it on the floor and then run it up across all four similar screw locations, and they were all within about like a 32nd of an inch. So these things are lined up exactly perfectly the same, and they are parallel with the floor of the boat. So parallel front to back, perpendicular up and down. So very, very perfect fit. About as big of a subwoofer system as you could fit into this thing. 210s into there. We were still able to retain all of the interior panels behind that also, though we did have to refit and remount one of them because it really wasn't mounted particularly well when it came in. Let's go ahead and slide it on the back side. We'll take a quick peek at that. So as I mentioned, I have to kind of pull things apart a little bit here to see that. So this boat comes with kind of a little storage pocket when you look inside of this panel. And behind there, of course, is the dashboard, all the cluster, all the instrument things. and then 2 subwoofers. There's a little way to cheat and take a peek into here. You can pop these clips here, and you can kind of get an idea of where everything went in here. So I have better photos of this. I'll show the photos when we go ahead, and at the end of the video we'll show some of the photos, but you can see for example where the subwoofers are in there, at least the one of them. This boat also was one of the things we talked to the customer a couple different times about. We found some unfortunate stuff. Whoever had done some of the upgrades in this boat, I assume they were upgrades anyways, and had added some of the lighting into this thing, rather than using a proper marinized connector, all they did was they used a regular automotive crimp cap and no sealant whatsoever. So they didn't use, every time we make connections in boats, we solder every connection we do, and then we use a heat shrink, and it's not just a regular heat shrink, it's actually a heat shrink that has an adhesive liner in it. And when you heat that heat shrink up, not only does the heat shrink shrink, it gets smaller of course, but that adhesive liner warms up and actually turns into basically a glue, and that glue seals that heat shrink around the soldered joint, so it is a 100% sealed, weather-tight joint. It's never ever going to fail. There are other ways to make good connections, and one of those is to use butt connectors, but they need to be the marine grade heat shrink style, and those ones you crimp on and then you heat them up and they shrink down. They're not quite as effective, but they're still pretty good. However, these people didn't even use that. They just used regular crappy nylon butt connectors, no sealant on them. Didn't even try to attempt to seal them up with an electrical tape. And the problem is most of those butt connectors were for the lights and a few other things in here, the horn and some other instruments they added into it apparently. And they were all laying on the floor. And that'd be one thing if they were tied up behind the cluster where there's never going to be any water, but literally they were on the floor of this boat behind some of the panels, and there's no doubt those locations were going to get wet. So we talked to the client about it. He wanted us to go through and repair all of those. So we spent literally hours pulling every part of this boat apart that we could find. And then we took all of those crappy butt connected connectors out of there. We soldered them all, and then we used our higher quality heat shrink on them all the way around. So now he never has to worry about problems. So if he's going to own this boat for 10 or 15 years, he's not going to have to worry about, hey, one spring this light doesn't work, the next spring the horn doesn't work, and the next spring those two of the lights stopped working, and oh, there's another intermittent problem. Some days it works, some days it doesn't work. And that's the kind of crap that you get when these, I don't know, fly-by-night places. I don't even know. I'm not even sure who did it, but it was just terrible quality. So gladly he asked us to go through and repair and fix all those up. So we went through, repaired, and fixed those all up. Let's go ahead and take a look at the amplifiers while we're in here and sitting right there. So let me get a little more light going on this. So what we did in here was, this thing originally has one solid piece of plastic that divides it. What we did is we took that piece of plastic out and we cut it down. So the original plastic takes up the lower portion, and then the upper piece we actually upgraded and put in a 3/4 inch piece of plastic up there, and that turns into our amplifier rack where we can mount all of our components to. So that piece of plastic is actually bolted, stainless steel bolts, washers, nylon lock nuts on those. We never have to worry about any of that falling down, of course. That gets bolted to the fiberglass on that seat there, and then we screw everything to that piece of plastic, and it works out super well. This is the way marine equipment should be mounted. It will last forever, and it really makes it nice and serviceable should you ever want to get in there and change anything. Let's say, for example, it adds that second set of tower speakers. Now, we didn't hook those up to the amplifier already, but the wires are very close nearby, so if you ever wanted to, we can do that. So you can see the two amplifiers in there, and then we have a fuse block, and then we have a relay, and then a couple of other fuses in here. So when we were talking to him about this, he really wanted to isolate
the first battery and second battery, so he can really jam on the stereo all day long, and then flip the switch and start it up and drive off, no problem. So what we did is we rewired that one switch I mentioned to the secondary battery. That switch flips on our relay. That relay is powered from the secondary battery, and that relay then turns on both amplifiers, powers both of the wired steering wheel remotes, powers the USB quick charge voltmeter, and then powers the radio also. And then of course the two amplifiers run back to the secondary battery also. And in this thing with this much power in it, we actually have 1-aught wire ran front to back, and then 4-gauge to both of these amplifiers. So super durable, out of the way. They can still store a bunch of stuff in here. In fact,
most of the stuff on that cart there came out of this compartment, and we'll go right back in there and not have any problem with fit or fitment at all.
looks great, sounds great, really easy to adjust. Want to add that second set of towers, no problem at all.
Let's go talk about some more of the accessories that were done in here. As I mentioned, we did some power accessories and a number of other things. So this is going to take a second. Let's go ahead and take a peek underneath here. So when they made this boat, they made a location for a secondary battery, even though there was no secondary battery in this boat. So we put in a monster, I think it's a group 34 is what it is. It's a Stinger SPP 2150 battery. Weighs about 85 pounds. It's a flat plate AGM battery, and they are massive. And they will be able to power this system a very, very long time. So you can kind of see the 1-aught wires come out of there. We actually like to leave not everything coated with loom, because we feel it's very important that people can easily identify what wires are what and not hook up things backwards if they ever choose to disconnect them or service them in the future. So that's the new secondary battery. And the location I was mentioning, first off, the original battery's on the opposite side of the boat. Secondary battery went on this side of the boat because there's a board that's fiberglassed in as part of the hull that we can mount this thing to securely and safely. And that also helps with the weight distribution in here. So from there, we need to pop this panel off here so we can kind of see what else was done in here. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way. And then one more panel to get that out of the way. Now, of course, this is access to the front of the engine compartment, but this is also where they mounted the battery switch in here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this location and see what we all did here. So first off, you're going to notice that there are 2 battery switches in here now. And I'm not going to get into the super depth discussion on that, but when you work through the fact that, so let's back up a second. So that's the original battery switch, just on and off because there was only one battery in here. This is the secondary battery switch that we put in to replace the original one. So this one allows you to disconnect the batteries from the engine, right? Disconnect the batteries from the engine, but that does not allow you to disconnect the stereo from the batteries. It can't serve both purposes. It can only serve one of those purposes. So we put the new upgraded one in there that has both the off, 1, 2, and all position in there, so that when you're driving the boat, you can have it on all. That's where you normally would have it when you're driving the boat. So the boat, the stereo, everything will always be starting up off of both batteries and also charging both batteries all the time. But if you want to go sit and chill, you can run it off just a secondary battery. Or if for some reason you need to, your secondary battery has been taken out or whatever, you want to run off just battery 1, of course you can do that also.
And then since we had this switch, the original switch, we moved that over to the secondary battery as a full cutoff for the audio battery. So you can literally disconnect the entire audio system from that battery. Likewise, you can turn the stereo on with that without having to have anything done with the first selector. Gets a little bit weird to think about, but you got to remember that the original battery switch is not designed to cut the batteries off from like the audio system. They're designed to cut the batteries off from the engine / charging system, so that if you kill battery number 2, you can flip it to battery number 1, start it back up, flip it to all, and then start charging everything while your boat's running again. That second switch over here allows us to completely disconnect that. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. If not, you can put a comment on the video and we can talk about that a little bit more, but it does work out really well. Another thing we had talked to the customer about is a built-in charging system. So this boat did not have any kind of dock charging system on there. We really like these no-code chargers. This is the 10 amp version, so it's a dual bank. So 5 amps per bank, it's enough to charge up the batteries overnight on just about any type of usage, even if you run the stereo battery basic all the way down. This is an intelligent battery charger, so it has both the capability of running AGM batteries, lead acid batteries, and maybe even lithium. Yeah, lithium batteries also. That's one of the brand new ones here. So you can see right now it's showing that both battery banks are totally full, and works out really, really well. So battery 1 is the original battery, makes sense. Battery number 2, the stereo battery is battery number 2, and then we line it up in here so it makes sense as far as the layout goes. The battery 1 is on the one side, battery 2 is on the battery 2 side, and it's easier to see when you're looking here. All right, so now, since we put a charger in there, we need some way to hook that charger up, and it's nice not to have cords laying all over, so we went ahead and put in a AC power port. As you can see, we actually have an extension cord ran over to that right now, and that's a 120 port, and you can run your dock power, shore power right into that, and that will keep your batteries charged up all the time. I think that's just about everything we put into this thing. I'm sure I'm missing 1 or 2 things, but pretty extensive amount of equipment that went into this thing. Of course, everything's super nice and clean. Sounds absolutely fantastic. I know the customer's going to love how this thing sounds. I love how this thing sounds. Let's go ahead and put a couple of these panels back on here real quick. And then let's turn the audio system up. Now, of course, with this recording device, once I start turning this thing up and there's a lot of bass playing, it's basically going to just kind of, the recording device kicks into concert mode. And when it's in concert mode, the sound basically becomes quieter, but it's designed to be able to deal with the really high volume levels. And when the bass really kicks in, it'll probably overpower the microphone and cut out a little bit, but at a minimum, we got to turn it up and at least see what it'll do. So let's go. And of course, everything works. So this thing sounds absolutely amazing. It's going to sound fantastic, whether they're surfing, whether they're floating around. You know, one thing we didn't even get a chance to talk to about yet are the tower speakers. So let's go ahead and take a quick peek at those. Of course, making sure that these things get mounted and wired right is very, very critical. You can kind of see how those get put in. Of course, it's always important that the safety chains get put in. I like to talk about this in all these videos. A lot of times people don't even understand what those are there for. But those are there in case of the worst things happening. Somebody runs into your boat, you hit some incredible monster wave, something really excessive happens, and one of the mounts or the bolts was to break. This stainless steel cable here is designed as a secondary safety measure to grab that tower so it is not falling down and breaking somebody's skull who's sitting in one of these other seats. So it's really important that those get put in. Of course, anytime you're putting these things in, it's important that you use some thread locker to make sure everything stays in place. And as I mentioned, these wires actually come up through the tube on the left and then route all the way around, which is the front tube. And then when they get to here, they pop off. That's kind of our crossover plate back into the front tube and then on over to where they need to be. It does take some time to get those wires to route through there, but definitely well worth it. And we actually took the time to install several different options of tower speakers on this thing. So we hung a single 6, and we hung 2 6-inch towers up there, and then we hung a single 8, and then we hung 2 8-inch speakers on each side to be able to figure how much room we comfortably had. And because it's definitely a possibility he may want to go to a second set of towers, we wanted to know, hey, can we do 2 8s in this thing, 2 pairs of 8s, or can we only fit 2 sets of 6.5s? And I was quite comfortable after we fit everything in here that we could get to 2 sets of 8s and still have plenty of walkway. I'd be able to walk through here shoulder width and not really have to worry about hitting anything at all. So those look great, fit great. We did unfold the mini top on this thing to make sure that everything has clearance, and of course it does. So they look very, very good in there. And like I said, I imagine I am forgetting more than one thing about this boat. This has actually been a pretty large project. It's taken quite a few days to go through here by the time we went through and fixed up everything and changed over all the wiring to the secondary battery and rerouted the switches and a number of other things here. So I'll add some photos at the end of it, and if you got any questions or comments, feel free to put them down in the questions section. If you love seeing some of these videos, hey, hit the like, subscribe button. We appreciate that. We love putting these videos out there. We know there's not a lot of places that will share this much information on boat projects or really any other kind of projects. And we know there's not a lot of these boats around even to be able to look and see what can be done with them. So if you are looking at getting some work done on your own boat, pontoon, RV, car, truck, motorcycle, give the experts here at Sweet Sounds a call, 507-345-8863. Want to see some of our other projects? Check out our gallery at sweetsounds.com, or of course, check out our YouTube page on YouTube. Take care. Thanks for watching.